Right. Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the VICC Virtual Molecular Tumor Board session for today. I'm really excited to have Alexa Dickson from the Variant Scientist Network and Washington University at St. Louis, where she's going to introduce us to the Variant Scientist Network and show us her presentation from VUS to VSN, Building a Community of Variant Scientists. So without further ado, thank you for being with us today. I've been really excited about this. I'm part of the Variant Scientist Network, and I advocate for everybody to go check out what they're doing, see the education offerings and everything that this group is contributing to our field. So go ahead, take it away.
Thank you so much for that introduction, Beth. And thanks so much to the VIC for inviting me to come talk about this. It's a little different topic, I think, probably than most of us are used to. We're used to talking about variants themselves, how to curate them, how to annotate them, how to classify them, how to represent them, and how to make the information useful. But I want to spend time today talking about the people that are doing this work. I wanted to ask a fairly basic question. Who are variant scientists? Who are the people that are doing this kind of work? And so I'm going to tell you about what happened when we asked that question, what were the answers that we got, because the study I'm going to talk about today actually helped lead to building the Variant Scientist Network, or the VSN. So the story goes from VUS to VSN, understanding variants to understanding the people who interpret them. And I think the reason that this subject really matters is due to something that I think everyone here knows, is that genetic testing has really exploded. This figure shows the availability of genetic tests in the United States from 2012 to 2022. And so in roughly a decade, we've gone from thousands of tests to tens of thousands of tests. And with all of those tests, that means a lot of data. A lot of data is being generated. Genomic sequencing is estimated to generate on the order of 20 to 40 billion gigabytes of data per year. And I'm personally not very good at visualizing that much information, but if you can visualize that, that's on the order of 6 billion HD movies. That's the same amount of data that we're generating from these genetic tests. Where we come in, though, is who are the people that are figuring out what all of this data means? Someone has to identify the variants that are identified by these genetic tests. Someone has to investigate them, curate them, put them into readable formats for physicians and clinicians to be able to utilize that information. And we know AI is increasing, but AI is not yet able to replace the human variant scientists that are doing this. And so here's one of these instances where I'm going to ask for some feedback from the group. Just by show of hands, how many people here, or emojis or whatever you want to do, how many people here have either done variant interpretation in the past or are currently doing variant interpretation? Use your little virtual hand or an emoji. I see some hands going up. Yeah. So this topic's probably going to feel familiar to a lot of you. And this is how I think about where variant scientists sit in genomic medicine. We start with the sequencing that gives us thousands of variants. The bioinformatics software is able to filter those variants and gather information. But then somewhere between that evidence gathering and the clinical decisions that come from that, there has to be someone to take all the information and put it into a usable format. And that's the place where variant scientists live. And they're not simply pushing a classification button and getting the answer and using that. They're actually taking this information and they're weighing it and they're comparing it to the phenotype information that they have. They're looking at any studies that have been published and determining if they're actually relevant, if they're well controlled, if it's a valid research study to be incorporating into clinical decision making. And they're often discussing these kinds of cases with their colleagues to get additional information. And then documenting it as well. So variant scientists really serve as the bridge between genomic data and clinical decision making. And we decided, we realized that even though we know a lot about this process, we don't really know much about the people who are doing this process. Who are they? What do they actually do? How are they trained? What does their career look like? And what do they need? So we decided to start looking around. And so this is a snapshot of job postings from Indeed on a single day in February of 2024. If you just look at the job titles, they're all very different: variant analyst, review scientist, genomic scientist. They're all a little bit different. The employers are all different. The educational requirements are all different. The salaries are different. And sometimes the job descriptions are even a little bit different. But when you start reading these job ads, they're all very similar in terms of what they are asking for, the types of experience they need. So here's another interactive question. Put in the chat, if you would, if you had to hire a variant scientist tomorrow, what are the kinds of words you would put on your ads? Maybe from Vic, you might put resourceful, yeah. You might put, you know, familiarity with civic, familiarity with nomad experience, yeah. Definitely. Education, I'm sure would be on there. Any other thoughts of words you might put on a job ad for variant scientists? Maybe attention to detail, definitely. Thanks, Cheryl. Things like maybe literature review, report writing, I don't know, quality improvement, attention, yeah, attention to detail, quality, those sorts of things. So that's the kind of things that we were thinking about, is what are the kinds of words you would even use to describe these people. There was a workforce here. Clearly, there's people hiring people like this, but we don't know much about this workforce. So we decided to create a survey to find out more about this. And that survey, this study, is what we ultimately published in the Journal of Molecular Diagnostics. We had 87 respondents who classified themselves as variant scientists or genomic scientists, and a few things stood out immediately. First of all, this is a highly educated workforce. Nearly half of the respondents had a PhD. 38% had a master's degree, and the rest had bachelor's or MDs. Their educational backgrounds were also diverse. There was a lot of genetics. There was also genetic counselors and molecular biology. There was some animal science as well. And then the job titles that they had were also equally diverse. Most had some variation of variant scientists, but there was also biocurators, genetic counselors who were doing this work, staff scientists, genome scientists, and then there were some management positions that were doing this kind of work as well. But then here's the statistic that I find particularly interesting. 78% of respondents said they were having their training done on the job. So we have this really highly specialized workforce, and the predominant way we're training them is get hired, and then we'll tell you how to do what you need to do. So I'm curious, just by, again, virtual raise of hands or emojis, how many of you learned what you needed to learn about this kind of field on the job? I am definitely one that learned what I needed to learn on the job. I see a lot of hands and thumbs up. Yeah, exactly. So our respondents is exactly what you would expect. We're all learning on the job. So this really begs the question, as genetic testing continues to explode, as we've seen, is this apprenticeship model really a sustainable training model? Apprenticeship, essentially getting hired, and then you can figure out what you need to do. This is one of my favorite figures from the paper because it shows really how broad this field can be. We think about variant scientists classifying the variants and writing the reports, but in addition to that, they're doing a lot of other activities as well. And the number one on that is the training. 78% are trained on the job, so we're the ones that are training more variant scientists to do what we do. But they're also involved in project management, in supervision, in test development, in research. But at the bottom here, what we're not doing is patient care or genetic counseling. And that's important because that helps kind of draw a little bit of a distinction between some of what the adjacent professionals in this field are doing. We're not seeing patients, we're not doing the genetic counseling, we're doing kind of the things upstream from that. So when someone asks me what a variant scientist does, it's not just simply they classify variants. That's part of what they do, but there's an entire ecosystem around what they're doing. They're interpreters, they're educators, they're curators, they're problem solvers. We had that in the chat earlier about the types of words you would use in a job posting. So what we had here is this is a real workforce. They're doing a lot of important work. And so we asked them how things were going. Peter, did you have a question or was that a virtual hand raise from earlier? Just a virtual hand raise. Okay. Here's the part that I found strange. We asked how satisfied are variant scientists, and the response actually was very well. They are very happy. They're satisfied with what they're doing. 78% reported being satisfied with their career path. 87% felt adequately trained, and they were getting enough resources. So what's the problem? The difference is when we asked how they felt represented by their professional societies, the respondents were a lot less positive about professional development or resources coming from professional organizations, and especially about if they received adequate recognition. So the problem wasn't, I don't like my job. They like their job. The problem was, I like my job, but where's the rest of my profession? Where's the professional infrastructure? Where's the community? Where's the career pathways? Where's the training and the recognition? And so that question, that part ultimately became a much bigger question than just was in the publication. So because we asked what they needed and they told us what they needed, we couldn't just say, well, that's interesting and move on. We asked, what could we actually do about that? So the Variant Scientist Network grew out of the conversations that were occurring because of this publication. So we created an advisory board that includes variant scientists and professors and clinical directors, students and genetic counselors. And we decided to focus a lot of our work on the education component and the visibility component because the goal wasn't just to have an organization to have an organization. It was there to address the concrete problems that the variant scientists said they were having. And apparently, we weren't the only ones that thought that this was a need. The network started growing, and this is a representation of the individuals from around the globe that have joined us. It's not just US based, it's not local based, it's international. So that shows that it's a need that other people feel they have as well. And they're coming from an enormous number of different organizations, academic medical centers, diagnostic laboratories, commercial companies, and other organizations. And I love that this slide, you can recognize some of these names, but these people were not connected before the Variant Scientist Network. They didn't know each other. So that's an important distinction. This workforce existed before, but it really wasn't a community. And that's what we're trying to build here is a community. And we started asking why people were joining. But before I show you what we found out, I want you to put in the chat, what are the types of things you would want from a professional organization like this? Education, definitely. Yeah. Networking for sure. Those are the kinds of things that we were finding. People wanted updates on changes to practice. Exactly. Yes. Job postings. Exactly. Yes. Those are the things that we found. Education, networking. community building, discussion boards, job opportunities. So we started organizing our activities around these things that the people told us that they were needing from each other. So the first kind of overarching problem is, how do we get better at this? How do we get better at our jobs? We've built a monthly educational series around topics that variant scientists are actually encountering. We had some career spotlights, resources addressing splicing changes, non-coding variants. We had updates that we all encountered at the ACMG annual meeting. We're doing journal clubs. One of the most popular events we've had so far is My Most Challenging Variant, where different variant scientists from across the globe come on and present their variants and get feedback from the group on what they could do next or how they could take the variant classification to the next level. And then we had some education on MAVES as well. And this is one of the places where I think that the Variant Scientist Network and VICC could really have a partnership, a natural partnership, and this education component. There's people that are developing standards and resources, and VICC and VSN are the people that need to understand them to be able to implement them. So I think this is one place where VICC can partner with the VSN very naturally. The second problem was almost very simple. It was very simple. It was just, who else does what I do? And what we found in our study was that a lot of variant scientists are working remotely. So they're not having that interpersonal connection potentially, or if you're at a smaller institution or an academic medical center, there might not be very many other variant scientists that you can interact with. So we are trying to create community through a Slack channel and through a LinkedIn group where we have posts about educational events, job postings. There's conversations occurring about, this is what I encountered. What would you do in a situation like this? And I recently had one where I had a variant in a gene I hadn't encountered before. There wasn't much information on the gene, and I put the question out there, and someone responded to me with resources I wasn't even aware of that existed. So it's very useful. We all know that variant interpretation is complicated enough. We really shouldn't be solving these complicated issues, I think, independently. We need to bring resources together and solve these complicated issues together to be efficient. The third problem is a little bit more complicated. Where does this career go? Because this is a relatively new career within the clinical genomics field, there isn't really a career ladder or a career progression that's been established. So we wanted to highlight some different careers. You might start as a variant scientist, you might develop into a senior clinical scientist or become a scientific or technical lead that might become management or supervisory. But from there, really, this career can branch into any number of different subcategories. And so we're trying to bring together people from all of these diverse backgrounds to show people what's available, because visibility doesn't just matter in that people want to be recognized. If people aren't even aware that this is a career field that's open or available to them, it's difficult for people to be able to choose this career. We also wanted to highlight these last two, this mentorship and the certification questions, because that's something that could potentially be valuable in the future, and we're keeping on our roadmap for the future. And the fourth problem is a little bit different. Does actually anyone know that we exist? Variant scientists work behind the scenes. There's physicians and genetic counselors that are doing the patient-facing roles, but variant scientists are completely behind the scenes reviewing the literature and the evidence. And so when you hear professionals thinking about and talking about the workforce that does genetic testing, I think oftentimes variant scientists are overlooked. And I think that our survey captured that. People felt that they received adequate recognition from their employers, but from the professional organizations, the response was just different. We wanted again, it matters. Professional visibility matters so that people know the types of opportunities that might be available to them in the future. It's important because institutions should recognize the education and experience that variant scientists have and what they bring to the work. And I think the most important part of this is that visibility matters in that who gets invited to the conversations about the future of genomics and genomic medicine. That's where the visibility matters. Variant scientists should be brought to the table and involved in those kinds of conversations. So we're doing things like trying to increase professional visibility. We're having a Variant Scientist Appreciation Day. Keep your eyes out for October 25th will be Variant Scientist Appreciation Day. And um, yeah, we're just hoping to bring more visibility to us. And that kind of leads to the bigger question. We started this project by asking who are variant scientists, but now the bigger question that we're asking is what could this profession become? How do we train people deliberately instead of training people on the job? How do we create meaningful recognition or career progressions? How do we connect people? So all of this expertise that different people have at different institutions doesn't kind of just live in those separate institutions, but we bring it all together and share that expertise and that knowledge. And I don't think these are not questions that the Variant Scientist Network can address by themselves. So that's why I was so excited to talk to Vic about this, is like, where could this profession go in the future? So why should Vic care about any of this? I think the answer is that Vic has been involved in creating standards, and these standards don't implement themselves. Variant scientists are the ones that are taking these classification frameworks and implementing them and putting them into practice. There's expertise. These people are the ones that are spending their days investigating variants. There's implementation. They're the ones translating frameworks into workflows. There's education. Like I said, they're the ones that are training new variant scientists. And they're in a unique place to provide feedback because they're the ones that are in the trenches doing the work on a daily basis, where they can give the feedback if frameworks or guidelines or tools are not working the way they should, they can give that feedback. And this network also gives us a mechanism through community for distributing knowledge throughout laboratories. And though the variant scientist is heavily germline, there is somatic variation being investigated by the Variant Scientist Network. So again, where I think about the VICC and the VSN is the implementation and the education that we're both trying to get out into the field. And so I think we can connect on that point. So this is where I'm going to end with a question. How can we build this future together? Because I don't think the answer is just do more webinars. I would like to think about what can we do together to educate the workforce, recognize, connect it. So I'd love to hear from you. Come off mute or put your thoughts in the chat.
Great. Thank you so much. I think that is really thought-provoking. When you were talking about professional representation and societies, like it is really difficult as a variant scientist to know what kind of membership you need for different societies. And because sometimes like variant scientist isn't listed as like a full member. It says lab, it usually says like lab directors or PIs or whatever. And then you're like, well, where do I fit? And so I found that you sometimes need to like ask, like find the right person to ask, and it's not always evident. And then it leaves me feeling a little impostery. But I do think that like we are really valuable. So I'm wondering if we could do some advocacy with those like major genetic societies and say like, hey, can you include variant scientists in one of your membership tiers so that, and then perhaps if people see that we're in one of the membership tiers, they'll actually get membership from both variant scientists. I don't know.
A good point. Yeah. ACMG, I know, has added variant scientists as a when you register for the event, variant scientist is an option. So at least you're not making a decision between, well, I'm not quite a laboratory director, but I'm not quite other either. So yeah, I agree. Peter?
Oh, your
Peter?
your audio sounds very squeaky to me. I can't quite make out what you're saying. Okay. If you want to type it into the chat, Peter, I'm happy to advocate.
Well, if I can jump in the middle while he's typing, I wonder how you visualize the concept of variant scientists when you think of people who are doing cytogenetics and doing similar work as a variant scientist, sitting in front of the computer, going through the chromosomes, karyotypes, and all those things. How broadly you are thinking about them to include in this conceptual of variant scientist, because that is also a huge field which didn't, I don't think they have any organization as such, you know.
That's true. They do have a certification at least through ASCP. Is that right? I think. Um, but yeah, it's the same kind of concepts, right? It's instead of single nucleotide variants or maybe gene level deletions, it's the same concept. But yeah, I agree. People that are reading cytogenetic tests are highly educated and are taking the information that they're gathering from the testing that they're doing and putting it in an understandable format for clinicians as well. So yeah, I think we all fall into a similar kind of bucket.
So Peter typed his question into the chat here. It says germline and cancer phenotypes are the same at the molecular level. The distinction of what VICC does and others, genetic counselors for inherited diseases, is not significant when describing evidence for constitutive mutations like PS4.
Yeah, definitely. And understanding those differences is something I think that a lot of variant scientists do. They know the differences and they understand the frameworks and uh, classification components that go into kind of the differences between inherited and somatic variants.
Yeah,
It's been really interesting being in this field for a long time, like Beth, that
yeah.
your comment about how people are trained on the job is really, I mean, there was no training because this job didn't exist. So I was not trained as a variant scientist because there were no variant scientists. So I have now trained many some of whom have gone on to do other things, and some of, now that when we recruit new variant scientists, there are actually people who have experience as variant scientists, which is a very different thing. So it's I think it's great to start to, it's a new career, a new field, to have a professional society is a great idea.
Yeah, we put together, there's even educational degrees now that they're not called variant science, but they're in that same vein, genomic analysis, genomic interpretation. And so the Variant Scientist Network has a couple of pages on our website of master's programs that are specifically for variant scientists or certificate programs that are designed for people who already have an advanced degree but just need a little bit more education to get
Hmm.
them a little bit of the more that specialized training for what variant scientists do.
Hmm. That's great.
Absolutely. Um, have you found that companies have increased kind of the career ladder in response to kind of the networking and organization that the Variant Scientist Network and others have done?
I don't know if it's in direct response. I'd like to think it
Mm.
was. The Variant Scientist Network has only been around for about a year, so we're a very new organization relatively. But I do know that different companies are developing career ladders or career progressions based on the experience that variant scientists are bringing to the table. So I know at our particular institution, we have the clinical variant analyst, which is kind of the entry level position, and then that can progress to a clinical variant scientist, and then a senior clinical variant scientist, and then a lead variant scientist, which is kind of similar to technician positions. But then I know other companies are treating it more like a faculty progression adjacent. So something coming in as an associate or assistant and moving their way up to a full variant scientist. There are those discussions and those career progressions happening, and so I do see that as a positive change. Because as Cheryl mentioned earlier, when I started in this field in 2013, there was no such thing as a variant scientist. I came in
Mm-hmm.
as a sequencing specialist and then kind of progressed through the ranks, I guess, until we created our own variant scientist department. So seeing those changes has been really great. Seeing at least some increased recognition of uh, variant scientists and what they bring to the table, especially like you said, experienced variant scientists, Cheryl, are so valuable. Um, it's been a great change to see.
Yeah, that's great. Trying to think, I had one more thing. Oh yeah, wanted to say like October 25th. I'm really looking forward to that, having a Variant Scientist Appreciation Day. I know that like at least in our team, the variant scientists have been, kind of tagging on to the Genetic Counselor Appreciation Day a little bit, which has been great to be recognized there. But it would be nice to kind of celebrate our own way too. So really grateful for that advocacy there and awareness.
Definitely keep it. If you're interested, we have a survey out right now for variant scientists on the best places to work for variant scientists. So we're going to announce the best places to work for variant scientists on Variant Scientist Appreciation Day. This year, unfortunately, it's on a Sunday as Variant Scientist Appreciation Day, but we'll have the actual event on October 26th, where we'll announce the best places to work and where we'll highlight some work from different variant scientists and show the importance of the work that variant scientists do.
That is great. All right. Are there any lingering questions or comments or ideas for collaboration? I think that um, whenever we can kind of cross advertise between our groups, I think we should, just because I think that intrinsically we're just connected and interested in similar things.
Things, yeah.
Yeah. So I think it's going to be, I think this will be great because I know that we have genomic scientists, variant scientists, and informatics folks that dabble, in VICC, along with many others that are involved in this. And in a lot of labs, it's the actual like lab director that will step in and do this work too. So I think that this is this could be very far reaching. So very
Definitely.
cool.
And that's part of the thing that I love about this field is how diverse we all are and how many of these roles are a little squishy in terms of, we all kind of wear many hats. So, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. That's how I got my start. I was an assay developer, and I found myself doing tons of literature review and dabbling in databases and things. And somebody said, "You're wearing too many hats. What do you want to do with your life?" And I said, "I kind of like the interpretation part. Can I just do that?" And and eventually it came to be. But like, I mean, everybody has their own path. It's really interesting. So Anyhow, thank you so much. I think we could probably end a little early if there aren't any other pressing questions, but I really appreciate your time. I want to advocate for the Variant Scientist Network. For those on the call who are variant scientists, follow them on LinkedIn, join the calls, volunteer when you can, and kind of help us make this a successful partnership. So thank you.
Thanks so much.
You bet. Everybody have a great day.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
You.